In a quiet little town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a woman named Sarah. She was an ordinary woman with an extraordinary life story waiting to unfold. Unlike most people in her position, Sarah didn't crave attention or luxury. Her days were filled with simple joys, tending to her garden, baking fresh bread, and volunteering at the local library. Despite being married to Richard, one of the wealthiest men in the country, she preferred living a modest life. Sarah owned only a few pieces of jewelry, drove an old car, and dressed in clothes that could be found in any regular store. To her, happiness wasn't about material things. It was about connection, kindness, and staying true to herself. Richard, on the other hand, was anything but ordinary. He had built his fortune from scratch, starting as a young man with nothing more than a dream and relentless determination. Over the years, he became known for his sharp business acumen and innovative ideas. His name appeared in newspapers and magazines, and his company's logo adorned billboards across cities. Yet, despite his immense success, Richard never let wealth change him. He admired Sarah deeply for her humility, and often joked that she kept him grounded. Together, they made an unlikely pair, a billionaire and a woman who valued simplicity above all else. One sunny afternoon, Sarah decided to take a break from her routine. It had been a long week, and she felt like treating herself to something special. After finishing her chores, she hopped into her car and drove toward the Gilded Spoon, a popular restaurant in town. Known for its elegant decor and gourmet dishes, the Gilded Spoon attracted wealthy patrons from nearby areas. While Sarah rarely visited such places, she thought it would be nice to try something different for once. Little did she know, this decision would lead to an unforgettable experience. When Sarah arrived at the restaurant, she parked her car and stepped out, feeling slightly out of place among the flashy vehicles surrounding her. Dressed in a pair of faded jeans, a cozy sweater, and comfortable sneakers, she looked distinctly different from the other guests arriving in designer outfits and high heels. Still, she smiled warmly as she approached the entrance, eager to enjoy a peaceful meal. Inside, the ambiance was sophisticated with soft lighting, plush chairs, and waitstaff moving gracefully between tables. The scent of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, making Sarah's stomach growl in anticipation. At the hostess stand, a young woman greeted Sarah with a polite smile. "Good afternoon," Sarah said cheerfully. "I'd like a table. For one, please." The hostess glanced at her briefly before her expression shifted ever so slightly. Her smile faltered, and her tone turned cold. "I'm sorry," she replied curtly, "but we have a strict dress code here. You'll need to come back another time when you're dressed appropriately." Sarah blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Dress code?" she asked, glancing down at her outfit. "Yes," the hostess confirmed, her voice firm. "We require formal attire. Jeans and casual wear aren't allowed." For a moment, Sarah stood frozen, stunned by the rejection. She hadn't expected such treatment, especially since she hadn't done anything wrong. All she wanted was to sit down and enjoy a meal like anyone else. Part of her wanted to argue, to explain that appearances shouldn't matter when someone simply wanted to eat. But Sarah wasn't the confrontational type. Instead, she nodded quietly, thanked the hostess, and walked away, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. As she exited the restaurant, she couldn't help but notice the disapproving stares following her. It was as though everyone inside had silently agreed with the hostess's judgment. Driving home, Sarah replayed the incident in her mind. She tried to brush it off, reminding herself that not every place suited everyone. But the sting of being refused service lingered. It wasn't just about the restaurant. It was about how quickly people judged based on appearances. By the time she reached her house, she felt a mix of frustration and sadness. That evening, as she sat across from Richard during dinner, she debated whether or not to share what had happened. In the end, she decided to tell him, thinking it might lighten the mood. With a small laugh, she recounted the story, describing the hostess's dismissive attitude and the uncomfortable encounter. To Sarah's surprise, Richard's reaction was far from lighthearted. His usual calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of quiet fury. He listened intently, his jaw tightening with each detail, When Sarah finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing in thought. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "No one should treat you or anyone like that," he said firmly. Though Sarah shrugged it off, saying it wasn't worth dwelling on, Richard couldn't let it go. He knew how hard Sarah worked to maintain her sense of self despite their wealth. Seeing her hurt because of someone else's prejudice ignited a fire within him. That night, as Sarah drifted off to sleep, Richard stayed awake, formulating a plan that would soon leave the entire town talking. Unbeknownst to Sarah, this seemingly small incident would set off a chain of events that would transform not only the restaurant, but also the way people viewed kindness and inclusivity. Richard's next steps would prove that even the simplest acts of defiance could spark meaningful change. The next morning, Richard woke up with a clear purpose. He didn't waste any time dwelling on anger or frustration. Instead, he channeled his emotions into action. Sitting at his desk in the home office, he pulled out his laptop and began drafting emails to his team of trusted advisors and business associates. His fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as he outlined his plan. By the time Sarah came downstairs for breakfast, Richard was already deep in conversation with his lawyers, real estate agents, and public relations team. Sarah noticed the flurry of activity but didn't think much of it. She assumed Richard was handling one of his many business ventures. "Big day at work?" she asked casually as she poured herself a cup of coffee. Richard glanced up from his phone, giving her a reassuring smile. "Something like that," he replied vaguely. He didn't want to spoil the surprise just yet. For now, he needed to focus on executing his plan without raising suspicion. By mid-morning, Richard's team had swung into action. The first step was acquiring the building where the Gilded Spoon was located. It wasn't difficult for someone with Richard's resources. Within hours, his real estate agents reached out to the property owner, offering a generous sum that couldn't be refused. The deal was finalized quickly, and by lunchtime, Richard officially owned the entire building. News of the acquisition spread like wildfire among the restaurant staff. When they arrived for their shifts later that afternoon, they were greeted with notices informing them of the change in ownership. Confusion rippled through the ranks as employees wondered what this sudden development meant for their jobs and the future of the establishment. Meanwhile, Richard wasted no time envisioning the transformation he had in mind. He wanted to turn the Gilded Spoon into something entirely different, a place that welcomed everyone, regardless of how they looked or what they wore. He envisioned a cozy diner-style eatery where people could enjoy good food without feeling judged. To bring his vision to life, he assembled a team of architects, interior designers, and chefs who shared his passion for inclusivity. Together, they brainstormed ideas for the new space, focusing on creating an atmosphere that felt warm and inviting. Gone were the pretentious chandeliers and velvet chairs. Instead, they opted for wooden tables, soft lighting, and comfortable seating that encouraged guests to relax and feel at home. As plans took shape, Richard made sure every detail aligned with his values. He insisted on implementing a strict policy of respect and kindness for both customers and employees. No one would ever be turned away because of their appearance or background. Prices would also be kept affordable, ensuring that people from all walks of life could dine there comfortably. Richard even went so far as to include a community table in the center of the restaurant, symbolizing unity and connection. It was his way of reminding everyone that despite their differences, they all shared a common bond over food and fellowship. While Richard worked tirelessly behind the scenes, Sarah remained blissfully unaware of what was happening. She spent her days tending to her garden, reading books, and volunteering at the library. Occasionally, she thought about the incident at the Gilded Spoon, but she tried not to dwell on it. What she didn't realize was that Richard hadn't forgotten, not for a single moment. Every decision he made during those busy days was driven by his desire to stand up for her and make amends for the humiliation she had endured. A few days later, construction crews arrived at the site of the Gilded Spoon. Large trucks parked outside, and workers began dismantling the old decor. Passers-by stopped to watch, curious about what was going on. Some speculated that the restaurant was closing down permanently, while others guessed it might be undergoing renovations. No one could have predicted the extent of the changes taking place inside. Walls were repainted in cheerful colors, heavy drapes were replaced with sheer curtains, and outdated furniture was swapped for sturdy, rustic pieces. The once exclusive dining room was transformed into a vibrant space that exuded warmth and charm. Word of the transformation slowly trickled out to the public. Local newspapers caught wind of the story and sent reporters to investigate. When they discovered that Richard, the same billionaire who rarely involved himself in small-town affairs, was behind the project, interest skyrocketed. Journalists scrambled to piece together the puzzle, wondering why such a powerful man would invest so much effort into revamping a modest restaurant. Speculation ran rampant, with some suggesting it was a publicity stunt, while others believed it was a heartfelt gesture. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Richard was doing this for Sarah. Back at home, Sarah started noticing subtle hints that something unusual was brewing. Richard seemed unusually preoccupied, often disappearing into his office for hours at a time. Phone calls came in at all hours of the day, and delivery trucks frequently pulled into their driveway, unloading boxes filled with supplies. One evening, unable to contain her curiosity, Sarah knocked on Richard's office door. "What's going on?" she asked, peering inside. Richard looked up from his laptop, startled. "Oh, nothing important," he said with a grin, though his tone betrayed his nervous excitement. Sarah raised an eyebrow but decided not to press further. If Richard wanted to keep it a secret, she would respect his wishes, for now. As the weeks passed, anticipation grew within the town. Flyers began appearing around the neighborhood announcing the grand reopening of the restaurant under its new name, Everyone's Table. The slogan printed beneath the logo read, "Where everyone belongs." Intrigued residents marked their calendars, eager to see what Richard had created. Little did they know the revamped establishment was more than just a restaurant. It was a statement, a testament to the power of empathy and equality. And when Sarah finally learned the truth, she would realize just how deeply Richard cared about standing up for her, and for everyone else who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. The day of the grand reopening finally arrived, and excitement buzzed through the air. Bright banners fluttered in the breeze outside Everyone's Table, welcoming guests to the newly transformed space. The once exclusive restaurant had been completely reimagined with warm lighting, wooden tables, and cozy chairs that invited people to sit and stay a while. A large chalkboard near the entrance displayed the menu, filled with affordable yet delicious dishes designed to appeal to all tastes. Richard's team had worked tirelessly to ensure every detail reflected his vision of inclusivity and kindness. Sarah woke up that morning feeling a mix of curiosity and confusion. Over the past few weeks, she'd noticed Richard acting strangely, disappearing into his office for hours, taking mysterious phone calls and even canceling plans at the last minute. When she asked him about it, he simply smiled and said, "You'll see soon enough." Now, as she sipped her morning coffee, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. She glanced out the window and saw Richard pacing in the garden, talking animatedly on his phone. Whatever it was, it clearly meant a lot to him. Later that afternoon, Richard approached Sarah with a mischievous glint in his eye. "I have a surprise for you," he said, holding out his hand. "Will you trust me?" Sarah laughed, setting aside her book. "Of course," she replied, slipping her hand into his. They climbed into the car and drove toward town, Sarah peppering Richard with questions along the way. But no matter how hard she tried, he refused to give anything away. "Patience," he teased, grinning as they pulled into a parking lot. When Sarah realized where they were, her jaw dropped in shock. "Is this the Gilded Spoon?" she asked, staring at the building before them. Richard nodded, his expression softening. "Not anymore," he said gently. "This is Everyone's Table, and today we're celebrating its grand opening, with you as my guest of honor." Sarah blinked, overwhelmed by the gesture. For weeks, she had assumed Richard's secretive behavior was related to one of his business projects. She never imagined it had anything to do with her, or the incident at the restaurant. As they walked inside, Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. The place looked nothing like the cold, unwelcoming establishment she remembered. Instead, it radiated warmth and friendliness, exactly as Richard had promised. Staff members greeted them warmly, ushering Sarah and Richard to a table by the window. One of the servers handed them menus explaining that all proceeds from the day would go to local charities supporting underprivileged families. Sarah flipped through the pages, marveling at the variety of dishes available. There were hearty soups, fresh salads, homemade pies, and even vegan options. Everything was priced reasonably, ensuring that everyone could afford to enjoy a meal there. As they waited for their food, Sarah turned to Richard, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "This is incredible." Richard reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You deserve to be treated with respect," he said firmly. "What happened here wasn't right, and I wanted to make sure it never happens again. Not to you, not to anyone." His words touched Sarah deeply, and for a moment she struggled to find her voice. Finally, she managed a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "But you didn't have to do all this just for me." Richard shook his head. "It's not just for you," he replied. "It's for everyone who's ever been made to feel less than worthy because of how they look or what they wear. This place is a reminder that kindness should always come first." As the evening wore on, the restaurant filled with happy chatter. Families, couples, and friends gathered around tables, sharing laughter and stories. People from all walks of life mingled freely, united by the simple joy of good food and good company. Sarah found herself chatting with strangers seated nearby, struck by how effortlessly conversations flowed. It was clear that Richard's vision had come to life, a space where everyone truly belonged. Outside, reporters and photographers lingered, eager to capture the story unfolding within the walls of everyone's table. Word had spread quickly about Richard's bold move, and media outlets from neighboring towns sent crews to cover the event. By the end of the night, pictures of the restaurant and interviews with patrons flooded social media, sparking discussions about inclusivity and compassion. Many praised Richard for using his wealth to create positive change, while others expressed hope that more businesses would follow his example. For Sarah, the experience was both humbling and empowering. She had always believed in treating others with kindness, but seeing Richard put those principles into action on such a grand scale inspired her. That night, as they drove home, she leaned her head against the car window, lost in thought. "Do you think people will understand why you did this?" she asked softly. Richard glanced at her, his lips curving into a smile. "I hope so," he said. "But even if they don't, I know we've done the right thing. Sometimes it's not about changing the world. It's about making one small corner of it better." Over the following days, everyone's table became a beloved fixture in the community. Lines stretched out the door during peak hours, and regulars began forming close bonds with the staff. What started as a personal gift from Richard to Sarah evolved into something much bigger, a movement rooted in empathy and acceptance. Inspired by the success of the first location, Richard announced plans to expand everyone's table to other cities, bringing his message of inclusivity to even more people. Each new branch carried the same values: respect, affordability, and a commitment to serving everyone equally. Though Sarah initially worried about drawing too much attention to herself, she soon embraced her role as an advocate for kindness. She began speaking at community events, sharing her story and encouraging others to look beyond appearances. Her humility and sincerity resonated with audiences, inspiring countless individuals to rethink their own biases. Together, Sarah and Richard proved that even the simplest acts of defiance could spark meaningful change, and that love, when paired with action, had the power to transform lives. As weeks turned into months, everyone's table continued to thrive. The restaurant became more than just a place to eat. It was a symbol of hope and unity in the community. People from all walks of life flocked to its doors, drawn not only by the delicious food but also by the welcoming atmosphere Richard had created. Families celebrated birthdays there, friends caught up over coffee, and strangers struck up conversations at the community table. It wasn't uncommon to see a businessman in a suit sitting next to a construction worker in dusty boots, both enjoying plates of hearty stew. The message was clear. Everyone belonged here. Sarah, too, found herself spending more time at the restaurant. At first, she visited occasionally, still feeling a bit self-conscious about being associated with such a high-profile project. But as she watched how much joy the place brought to others, her hesitation faded. She started helping out behind the scenes, volunteering to organize events and fundraisers for local charities. One weekend, she hosted a book drive for the library where she volunteered, filling a corner of the restaurant with donated novels and children's stories. Another time, she arranged a cooking class for kids, teaching them how to make simple meals using fresh ingredients. Each event reinforced her belief that small actions could have a big impact. Richard, meanwhile, remained deeply involved in expanding everyone's table. He traveled frequently, visiting potential sites for new locations and meeting with architects and designers to ensure each branch stayed true to the original vision. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time to check in on Sarah and hear about her latest projects. Their partnership grew stronger as they worked together toward a shared goal, creating spaces where kindness reigned supreme. Richard often joked that Sarah was the heart of everyone's table, while he was merely the bankroll. But those who knew them understood that their combined efforts were what truly made the concept shine. The media coverage surrounding everyone's table showed no signs of slowing down. Reporters from national outlets began reaching out, eager to document the phenomenon sweeping across the country. Documentaries were filmed, magazine features were written, and talk show hosts invited Richard and Sarah to share their story on live television. While Richard handled most of the interviews with ease, Sarah initially struggled with the attention. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight and worried about saying the wrong thing. But with Richard's encouragement and the overwhelming support of viewers who admired her humility, she gradually grew more comfortable speaking publicly. During one particularly memorable interview, a host asked Sarah why she thought everyone's table had resonated so deeply with people. After a moment of thought, she replied, "I think it's because we're all looking for connection. Life can be hard sometimes, and it's easy to feel like you don't belong. This place reminds us that we're all human, and we all deserve to be treated with respect." Her words struck a chord with audiences, sparking an outpouring of gratitude on social media. Messages poured in from people sharing their own experiences of exclusion and thanking Sarah and Richard for creating a space where they felt seen and valued. Despite the positive reception, not everyone was pleased with the success of everyone's table. Some critics accused Richard of using the project as a publicity stunt, claiming it was nothing more than a clever marketing ploy to boost his company's image. Others argued that the restaurant's affordability came at the expense of quality, though anyone who had tasted the food knew this wasn't true. A few former employees of the Gilded Spoon even voiced resentment, blaming Richard for ruining what they considered a prestigious establishment. But Richard took these criticisms in stride, choosing to focus on the countless lives being touched by his work, rather than the negativity of a vocal minority. One day, as Sarah flipped through a stack of letters sent to the restaurant, she came across one that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a young woman named Emily, who explained that she had been struggling with anxiety and depression after losing her job. Feeling isolated and unworthy, she barely left her apartment for months. Then one afternoon, she stumbled upon everyone's table while walking aimlessly through town. Hesitant at first, she decided to step inside and order a cup of tea. The warmth of the staff and the friendliness of the other patrons gave her a glimmer of hope. Over time, she began visiting regularly, slowly rebuilding her confidence and reconnecting with the world. "Thank you for creating a place where I didn't have to feel invisible," Emily wrote. "You saved me when I needed it most." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she read the letter aloud to Richard later that evening. He listened quietly, his expression softening as she spoke. When she finished, he pulled her into a hug. "This is why we did it," he said simply. "Not for fame or money, but for moments like this. They sat together for a long time, reflecting on the ripple effects of their decision to transform the gilded spoon. Neither of them could have predicted how far-reaching the impact would be, or how many lives would be changed along the way. Inspired by stories like Emily's, Richard doubled down on his efforts to expand everyone's table. He partnered with schools, shelters, and community organizations to provide free meals during holidays and emergencies. In cities hit hard by economic downturns, he opened branches specifically designed to employ locals and stimulate growth. These initiatives earned widespread praise, cementing everyone's table as a force for good in communities nationwide. As the network of restaurants grew, so did the number of people inspired to pay it forward. Customers began donating tips to charity jars, organizing food drives, and even starting their own grassroots projects aimed at fostering inclusivity. Back home, Sarah embraced her role as a leader in the movement. Though she still preferred staying out of the limelight, she recognized the importance of using her platform to spread kindness. She collaborated with teachers to develop anti-bullying programs in schools, emphasizing the value of treating others with empathy and understanding. She also launched a campaign encouraging businesses to adopt similar policies of inclusivity, reminding them that profit didn't have to come at the expense of humanity. Her gentle, yet powerful approach won over skeptics, proving that change could start with something as simple as a smile or a kind word. By the end of the year, everyone's table had become a household name. What had begun as a personal gesture from Richard to Sarah had blossomed into a nationwide movement, touching millions of lives. Yet despite the accolades and achievements, neither of them lost sight of what mattered most: the people. Whether it was a single mom feeding her kids, a lonely senior finding companionship over pie, or a teenager discovering a safe haven amidst chaos. Everyone's table stood as a testament to the power of love and compassion. And for Sarah and Richard, that was worth more than any headline or award. As the months passed, everyone's table became more than just a chain of restaurants. It became a beacon of hope and inspiration for communities across the country. Each new location opened its doors with the same mission: to serve food with kindness and ensure that no one felt excluded. The success of the project was undeniable, but what truly set it apart was the way it brought people together. Strangers became friends over shared meals, and differences faded away in the warmth of conversation and laughter. For Sarah and Richard, watching this transformation unfold was deeply fulfilling. One chilly winter morning, Sarah arrived at the original Everyone's Table to help prepare for a holiday meal event. The restaurant had organized a special feast for families in need, complete with free hot meals, warm clothing donations, and toys for children. Volunteers buzzed around the space, setting up tables, decorating with festive lights, and arranging gifts under a small Christmas tree. Sarah moved among them, offering assistance wherever it was needed. Though she didn't consider herself the center of attention, her presence inspired others to pitch in with enthusiasm. People often remarked on how her quiet determination made them want to do better and be better. Richard joined her later that afternoon, having wrapped up meetings related to the expansion of Everyone's Table. Together, they greeted guests as they arrived, handing out scarves and gloves donated by local businesses. Children ran excitedly toward the tree, their eyes lighting up at the sight of wrapped presents. Parents expressed heartfelt gratitude, many sharing stories of hardship and resilience. One mother, holding her toddler close, told Sarah how much it meant to have a place where they could celebrate the holidays without worry. "You've given us more than just a meal," she said tearfully. "You've given us hope." That evening, as the last guests departed and volunteers began cleaning up, Sarah stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered streets. She thought about all the lives touched that day, the families who now had full stomachs and warm hearts, the volunteers who discovered the joy of giving back, and the countless others who would benefit from similar events in the future. It amazed her how something as simple as a meal could create such profound connections. Richard walked up beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Proud of you," he murmured. Sarah smiled softly. "We did this together," she replied. The momentum behind everyone's table continued to grow, fueled by the support of communities and the dedication of its founders. Richard announced plans to open international branches, starting with cities in Europe and Asia. He envisioned creating a global network of restaurants united by the same principles of inclusivity and compassion. To prepare for this ambitious step, he assembled teams of cultural advisors and chefs to adapt menus to local tastes while maintaining affordability. Sarah played a key role in these efforts, traveling alongside Richard to meet with potential partners and community leaders. Her ability to connect with people from diverse backgrounds proved invaluable in building trust and ensuring the vision remained authentic. While their work expanded globally, Sarah and Richard never lost sight of the importance of staying grounded. They continued to visit the original Everyone's Table regularly, sitting down for meals with staff and customers alike. These moments reminded them why they started the project in the first place, to make a difference in everyday lives. During one such visit, Sarah struck up a conversation with a young man named Jake who worked part-time as a dishwasher. He confided in her that he had recently dropped out of college due to financial struggles and felt stuck in life. Moved by his honesty, Sarah encouraged him to pursue his dreams, offering guidance and resources to help him get back on track. Months later, Jake returned to thank her. He had enrolled in a culinary program and aspired to become a chef. Stories like Jake's reinforced the idea that Everyone's Table was about more than just feeding bodies. It was about nurturing souls. As word spread about the positive impact of the restaurants, other entrepreneurs began reaching out to Richard and Sarah for advice on launching similar ventures. Some were inspired to start community kitchens, while others focused on initiatives addressing homelessness or education inequality. Richard welcomed these conversations, seeing them as opportunities to amplify the message of inclusivity. He even established a foundation dedicated to supporting grassroots projects aimed at fostering kindness and connection. Despite their successes, Sarah and Richard faced challenges along the way. Running a rapidly expanding network of restaurants required constant vigilance to maintain quality and uphold values. There were times when logistical issues arose, supply shortages, staffing conflicts, or unexpected expenses, but they tackled each obstacle with patience and teamwork. Critics still occasionally surfaced, questioning whether the project could sustain itself long-term. Yet every time doubts crept in, they found renewed strength in the stories of those whose lives had been transformed by Everyone's Table. One spring afternoon, Sarah received an invitation to speak at a national conference focused on social change. Initially hesitant, she agreed after Richard assured her that her voice mattered. Standing on stage before hundreds of attendees, she spoke candidly about her journey, from the day she was refused service at the Gilded Spoon to the creation of Everyone's Table. She emphasized the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of appearances, and urged listeners to challenge stereotypes in their own lives. When she finished, the audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet in admiration. For Sarah, it was a moment of validation, not for herself but for the message she carried. Back home, the couple reflected on how far they had come. What had begun as a personal act of defiance against injustice had evolved into a worldwide movement promoting empathy and equality. They knew there was still much work to be done, but they also recognized the power of collective effort. Every volunteer, donor, and customer played a role in shaping the legacy of Everyone's Table. Together, they were proving that kindness wasn't just a nice idea. It was a force capable of changing the world. As summer approached, Sarah and Richard celebrated another milestone, the opening of the 50th Everyone's Table location. Set in a bustling city overseas, the restaurant quickly became a hub for locals seeking comfort and connection. On opening day, Sarah watched as people of all ages and backgrounds gathered around tables, breaking bread and sharing smiles. A young girl tugged at her sleeve, holding out a drawing she had made. A colorful picture of the restaurant surrounded by stick figures holding hands. "This is my favorite place," the girl said shyly. Sarah knelt down to hug her, feeling a lump rise in her throat. In that moment, she realized the true measure of their success, not in numbers or accolades, but in the hearts they had touched. With each passing day, everyone's table grew stronger, its roots digging deeper into the fabric of society. Sarah and Richard knew they couldn't solve every problem or erase every act of cruelty, but they believed in the ripple effect of kindness. One act of compassion could inspire another, creating waves of change that reached farther than anyone imagined. And so they pressed on, driven by the belief that everyone deserved a seat at the table, and that love, above all else, had the power to unite humanity. Years passed, and everyone's table became a household name around the world. From small towns to bustling cities, the restaurant stood as symbols of hope, kindness, and unity. People didn't just visit for the food, they came for the sense of belonging, knowing they would always be welcomed no matter who they were or where they came from. For Sarah and Richard, seeing their vision grow into something so much bigger than themselves was both humbling and rewarding. They had started with one act of defiance against unfairness, and now that act had sparked a movement that touched millions of lives. Sarah often found herself reflecting on how far they had come. She still remembered the sting of rejection she had felt at the Gilded Spoon years ago. Back then, it had seemed like such a small incident, hardly worth dwelling on. But Richard had seen it differently. He had taken that moment and turned it into something extraordinary, a reminder that even the simplest acts of standing up for what is right could lead to incredible change. Now, as she walked through the aisles of any Everyone's Table location, she saw proof of that belief everywhere, in the smiles of customers, the dedication of staff, and the stories shared by people whose lives had been transformed. One of those stories belonged to a man named Carlos, who visited the original restaurant almost every week. When he first came to Everyone's Table, he was struggling to rebuild his life after losing his job and home. A friend had told him about the place, saying it was somewhere he wouldn't feel judged. On his first visit, Carlos sat quietly in a corner, unsure if he truly belonged, but the staff greeted him warmly, offering him coffee and conversation. Over time, he began opening up, sharing bits of his story with regulars and employees alike. Eventually, he landed a part-time job washing dishes at the restaurant, which helped him regain stability. Years later, Carlos became a manager at one of the newer locations, mentoring others who were trying to find their footing. "This place saved me," he once told Sarah during a quiet moment. "It gave me more than food. It gave me family." Stories like Carlos's weren't rare. In fact, they were the norm. Every day, across dozens of locations, people found solace, support, and opportunity within the walls of Everyone's Table. Some discovered friendships that lasted a lifetime. Others found courage to chase dreams they thought were out of reach. Teachers held tutoring sessions for students after school hours. Local artists displayed their work on cafe walls, and seniors gathered weekly for game nights. Each restaurant became a cornerstone of its community, a safe haven where everyone mattered. Richard continued to expand the project, but he did so with care, ensuring that growth never compromised the values at its core. He worked closely with Sarah to maintain the authenticity of Everyone's Table, consulting her before making major decisions. Together, they traveled to new branches, meeting staff and customers, listening to feedback, and celebrating milestones. Their partnership remained as strong as ever, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. Though Richard's wealth made the expansion possible, it was Sarah's compassion and wisdom that kept the soul of Everyone's Table alive. As the years went by, Sarah and Richard also began focusing on leaving a lasting legacy. They established scholarships for students pursuing careers in hospitality and social work, hoping to inspire future generations to carry forward the spirit of kindness. They collaborated with schools to teach children about empathy and inclusivity, using storytelling and interactive activities to drive the lessons home. They even launched a podcast series featuring interviews with individuals who had overcome adversity, aiming to spread messages of resilience and hope. Through these efforts, they ensured that the impact of Everyone's Table would endure long after they were gone. Despite their achievements, Sarah and Richard remained humble. They avoided the trappings of fame, choosing instead to live quietly and focus on their mission. Sarah still tended her garden, baked fresh bread, and volunteered at the library, while Richard balanced his business empire with his passion for philanthropy. They cherished their simple life together, finding joy in moments spent side by side, whether it was sipping coffee on their porch or taking evening walks through the neighborhood. To them, success wasn't measured by headlines or awards. It was measured by the difference they made in the lives of others. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Sarah and Richard returned to the original Everyone's Table for its 10th anniversary celebration. The restaurant looked much the same as it had when it first opened, though wear and tear showed in the wooden tables and chairs. Yet, rather than detract from its charm, these signs of use only added to its character. Inside, laughter and chatter filled the air as former employees, loyal customers, and community members gathered to mark the occasion. Pictures lined the walls, capturing memories from over the years, grand openings, holiday events, volunteer days, and countless meals shared among friends. During the celebration, a young girl approached Sarah and handed her a bouquet of wildflowers. "Thank you for making this place," she said shyly. "My mom says it's magic because it makes everyone happy." Sarah knelt down to meet her eye level, smiling gently. "It's not magic," she replied. "It's just love." The girl tilted her head, puzzled, but then nodded as if understanding. Watching from a distance, Richard felt a surge of pride, not because of what they had accomplished, but because of the way Sarah embodied the heart of Everyone's Table. Later, that evening, as the festivities wound down, Sarah and Richard sat together at a corner table, sipping tea and reminiscing about the journey. "Do you think we did enough?" Sarah asked softly, gazing at the crowd mingling happily around them. Richard reached for her hand, squeezing it lightly. "Enough isn't the point," he said. "What matters is that we tried. And look what happened. We inspired others to try too." Sarah nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. She realized that the true power of Everyone's Table lay not in its founders, but in the countless people who carried its message forward. In the years that followed, Sarah and Richard stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Everyone's Table, entrusting its future to the next generation of leaders. They continued to support the project from afar, offering guidance and encouragement whenever needed. But mostly they focused on enjoying the fruits of their labor, the knowledge that they had helped create a world where kindness reigned supreme. Whether it was through a warm meal, a friendly smile, or an open door, the spirit of Everyone's Table lived on, reminding humanity that everyone deserved to belong. And so, the story of Everyone's Table became more than just a tale of two people fighting against injustice. It became a testament to the power of love, compassion, and unity. It proved that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change, if only we dared to take the first step.